Beth Saggers is an Autism CRC project leader and Queensland University of Technology Associate Professor for Early Childhood and Inclusive Education. Today, Beth is going to be speaking about the really important topic of school connectedness. So without any further delay, I'm going to get out of your hair and Beth is going to talk to us about her presentation for about 15 minutes. Thanks very much, everyone, and over to you, Beth.
Hi everyone. So today the focus of my presentation is promoting school connectedness, and I'm going to talk with you about some initial findings we have from a school connectedness project. We're just trying to get the slides set up, sorry. There we go. Volume. Sorry. Oh, great. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay. So why is that? Okay, there we go. Sorry. Okay, so one of the things that we know, regardless of the wealth of research that's being done in the autism area, that students on the spectrum are still indicating the difficulties that they're having within school settings, and particularly with things like fitting in socially. And despite all of the research that has been done, these difficulties are still quite prevalent. The educational needs analysis that we did early on in the Autism CRC showed that the thing that all stakeholders indicated as the highest rating area of need for students on the spectrum was their social emotional needs. Within that educational needs analysis, the students on the spectrum, there was 107 of them who completed the survey, showed very high levels of mental health issues, as well as very low levels of school connectedness on the measures that we used within the survey. So it is still a very big issue within school-aged students on the spectrum. So if we look at what is school connectedness, it is that feeling of belonging, that sense of feeling personally accepted or respected within the communities that you are working in or within the schools that you're part of. There are two major components to school connectedness that are really important to that sense of school connectedness. One is the validation and respect that you get from the people that are within that community, being able to have your say, feel like you're able to contribute meaningfully as part of that community. As well as that, it's that sense of belonging, acceptedness, and inclusiveness within that community. And that's really built quite heavily on the relationships that are established in those settings. What we do know is that the school environment is considered a very strong protective factor against a number of things, including that academic outcomes are better when you have a good school connectedness. The risk of mental health issues and other health-related issues are lessened when you have good school connectedness. Levels of delinquency, violence, and psychological well-being is much more positive when there is a strong and supportive school environment for all students, regardless of who they are. So some of the things that have been commonly identified as protective factors for school connectivity include that positive and supportive school climate, and those positive peer connections and that opportunity for pro-social engagement within those environments. So we do know anecdotally, particularly, that when you have strong peer relationships within your school environment, your chances of success within that environment are increased. So what we do know is that school connectedness is a very strong independent predictor for depressive symptoms in adolescence. So if you have that strong sense of school connectedness, then you are less likely to have, it is a protective factor against a lot of those mental health issues that particularly can arise during adolescence. And that's for all students. What we've wanted to look at in the current project in the Autism CRC was school connectedness for students on the autism spectrum. So as I mentioned before, we know that when students are well connected to their school, they do better academically, there's less mental health problems, they're more motivated, they have better expectations for the future, they engage in less risk-taking behaviour and delay sexual activity and other sexually risk behaviours. So what we know is that the school environment nurtures well-being and that it plays a significant role in building this connectivity and providing this protective factor against a number of the things that we've just talked about. So the current School Connectedness project was particularly interested in looking at school connectedness for adolescents on the autism spectrum, and it goes across 3 different states of Australia and looks at school connectedness at a number of different levels. So in Western Australia and New South Wales, we're looking at rural and remote perceptions of school connectedness for students on the spectrum, their parents, and the schools that they are engaged with, and looking at how do those notions of school connectedness maybe differ or are similar to notions of school connectedness for students in more urban areas. In Queensland, we're looking at a bigger project that is actually putting in place and implementing an intervention for school connectedness that looks at not only a whole school approach to school connectedness, but provides a more individualised approach for students on the spectrum within that whole school. So if we have a look at the diagram on the left, so what we have been working on within this aspect of the project is implementing a school connectedness whole school approach to ensure that school connectivity can be positive and try and really strengthen that for students in general across a whole school environment and really nurture that inclusive school culture. Then at a more individualized level, what we have been doing is providing individualized training and support for students on the spectrum around building their resilience and looking at strengths and using this WISE model, which you can see on the right, to support their strengths and to actually help them engage within that school environment. At the same time, there has also been some training for parents and some professional development to look at increasing their parental confidence and well-being and help them to develop a better understanding of their adolescent children and improve the relationships for them. So this project has a very strength-based approach and a very inclusive approach, and what we have actually been trialling is pulling together with this more individualised intervention number of schools in South East Queensland. So some examples of some of the program content include the RAP-A ASD, which is the Resourceful Adolescence program that has been specifically adapted for students on the spectrum, and it has 6 particular aims which are outlined in this slide here, and has, as I said before, a very strength-based approach, looks at self-management and affect regulation strategies, and looks at helping to support them in their choices and an evaluation of those choices, and looking at those support networks around the students themselves. And it uses the 3 little pigs as a bit of an analogy, and the building a house out of bricks as that sort of strength-based approach to that whole program. At the same time, as part of this project, we also have the RAP-P, which is the Resourceful Adolescence Program for parents, which helps the parents to look at what their strengths are, what they're doing well, because they often don't get to focus on that, looking at understanding their adolescent children and the needs of that particular group, as well as valuing a lot of the skills that they have nurtured over the years with their children. At the same time, we've had this whole school approach that's been implemented across whole school communities, and within those communities, what we have established are a school committee, and many of these have been sustained post the project, and they have been using the Index for Inclusion to look at how can they build and support school connectedness within their school community. So there's a number of propositions that from the initial results of this project around this approach, around some key things that are important in building skill connectedness. One is the engagement of the stakeholders and all stakeholders. So for example, within these school committees, we've had students, parents, and teachers and staff from the administration as well. The second proposition is that it's very important to value the input of all those participants, being able to support this school connectedness with appropriate resources, and being able to establish those clear, specific and obtainable goals that can actually be implemented and achievable. And then making sure that all staff and members of the committee have clearly assigned roles and tasks. So for example, in one school that we've used as a case study recently, they decided that it was really important to develop as part of their school connectedness agenda, a Year 7 welcome book that actually was for the students themselves. So many times they felt that the information that was being received by families around welcome to the school was actually targeted at the parents rather than the students. So as part of this project, the committee, when they met, they established this as one of the goals, and we worked with the school leadership team, which included all of the school captains and the student leadership team, and we actually worked with Year 9s and 11s to look at, well, what are the important factors to consider when you're moving into this school environment? What sort of things would these students need to know coming into the school environment that were important? And they have, as a result of that, developed a number of strategies to actually roll out those outcomes. So that was some of the things that we've done in the whole school approach. From the more individualised intervention that was put in place with students on the spectrum in the RAP aspect of the project, some of the student responses from that part were talking about how it helped them to put their stress into perspective, as well as show them what their strengths were and identify those, how to cope with the stress or frustrating situations, and learning some of those sort of more ongoing life skills that were going to support them post-school. Other responses talked about how it supported their self-esteem and problem solving, nurtured their ability to establish friendships, and also the extra support and self-talk bricks were very useful for them and were sustainable things post the project for those students. From the parents' perspective, it was really good for them to realise how much of what they were doing was positive and appropriate for their children and their children's needs, and being able to highlight the strengths of their parenting was really important for them. And also helping them as parents to be able to manage their own stress and maintain calmness and support the family as a family network were important aspects for them as part of the training. So in summary, we know that school connectedness is a very vital factor in promoting well-being for all adolescents, not only those on the spectrum, that it's important to have a multifaceted intervention that supports not just the students, but also parents and teachers and whole school systems to focus on the promotion of resilience and connectedness, and that to date, the School Connectedness project that we've been doing in the Autism CRC has had extremely positive results in implementing a multifaceted intervention that uses all of these aspects to support school connectedness in schools. So we have had some recent research papers that have come out and there are more in the pipeline. These are just 2 examples that have been published recently. And we are also in the process of developing a website that will provide a summary of a range of different resources that will be freely accessible through the Autism CRC for not only teachers and school communities, but also parents and caregivers, with a soft launch, we hope, in June this year. I think my time's up, but there are other slides accessible on this presentation that just give you some other ideas around how you can build positive school communities and school connectedness for students of all different ages. Oh, sorry. Okay, apparently I can finish. So a lot of these things we do as part of our general classroom and school management, but it is about establishing those respectful relationships and looking at things like the school policies and practices that can create a positive environment. So some of the simple tips are that pro-social behaviour, that really concerted effort that teachers will make to establish different relationships with students in their classrooms, the use of some of that classroom management tools and teaching methods that they use to improve those relationships, being able to nurture some of that social emotional learning and competence for students is really important, and trying to enable that active participation of all students within the school community. And some other useful tips are establishing wherever possible that strong peer support, developing that rapport, and the use of humour cannot be underestimated within a school environment. And just something else that people might be interested in is the Australian Student Wellbeing Framework. Promoting school connectedness fits in very well with this framework and around the key elements of this framework, which are around student voice, inclusion, leadership, partnerships and support. And school connectedness and promoting school connectedness fits in really well with all of those. Thank you.